You don't belong here anymore, Rachel. The words hung in the air of the conference room, cold and final. I stared at my cousin Michael across the polished mahogany table, trying to process what was happening. Beside him, my other cousin, Stephanie, avoided my eyes, suddenly fascinated by her manicure. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm the head of product. Family businesses are complicated." "That they are." Howard hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. "Your father asked me to give you this if anything like this ever happened." He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. My throat tightened. He knew they might do this. Howard shrugged. James was many things, but knave wasn't one of them. He understood Robert's resentment better than anyone. I tucked the envelope into my bag. "Thank you, Howard. Don't be a stranger, Rachel. This isn't the end of your story with Palmer Tech. I'm sure of it." I smiled sadly, not believing him for a second. Goodbye, Howard. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally opened my father's letter. "My dearest Rachel Development, I've been with Palmer Tech since I graduated college." "That was your father's decision," Michael replied, straightening his tie. "But Uncle James is gone now, and we need to make some changes. The board agrees that the company needs different leadership." My father had died just 3 weeks ago. The funeral flowers had barely wilted, and here were my cousins, swooping in like vultures. "The board?" I repeated. "You mean you and Stephanie, and let me guess, Uncle Robert?" Michael had the decency to look uncomfortable. My father's brother, Robert, had always resented Dad's control of the company they'd inherited together. Now, with Dad gone, it seemed Uncle Robert had wasted no time aligning with his children to push me out. "Rachel," Stephanie finally spoke, her voice soft with practiced sympathy. "This isn't personal. It's business. You're a scientist, not a business person. You don't have the experience to lead product development at a company this size." I almost laughed. I had a PhD in biomedical engineering and had personally developed 3 of our most successful medical devices. Meanwhile, Stephanie had a bachelor's in communications and had spent the last 5 years nominally working in marketing, while mostly posting about our products on social media. "This is my father's company," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "He built Palmer Tech from nothing." "With our father," Michael corrected sharply. "Uncle James may have been CEO, but Dad was there every step of the way. And now it's time for a new generation of leadership." I looked between them, these cousins I'd grown up with, played with as children, celebrated holidays with for 30 years. Now they sat across from me like strangers, their faces masks of corporate detachment. "So that's it, you're firing me?" "We're restructuring," Stephanie said quickly. "We'll give you an excellent severance package, of course. 6 months' salary, health benefits through the end of the year." "How generous," I replied, not bothering to hide my bitterness. "And who's taking over product development?" "You, Michael? With your business degree and 0 technical experience." Michael's jaw tightened. "We're bringing in someone from outside. Someone with more management experience." "I see." I stood up slowly, gathering my dignity along with my notebook. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order. You got what you wanted." Rachel, Stephanie began, but I cut her off. "Save it. Just have HR send me the paperwork. I'll be cleared out by the end of the day." As I walked out, head high despite the burning behind my eyes, I heard Michael mutter to Stephanie, "That went better than expected." I spent the rest of the day in a daze, packing up the office I'd occupied for 8 years. Photos of my father and me at company events, awards for innovations I'd helped develop, the small glass plaque Dad had given me when our cardiovascular stent received FDA approval, to Rachel, who sees possibilities where others see problems. By 5 o'clock, my life at Palmer Tech was reduced to 2 cardboard boxes. I was placing the last of my books inside when there was a gentle knock at my door. About a minute. It was Howard Chen, our head of legal, and one of my father's oldest friends. "Sure, Howard. Just finishing up my involuntary exit." Howard closed the door behind him, his expression grim. I heard. I tried to argue against it, but I was outvoted. "It's fine," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. If you're reading this, then Robert and his children have made their move sooner than I'd hoped. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this, but perhaps it's for the best. Palmer Tech has been my life's work, but I never wanted it to be a cage for you. There's something you should know. When I first suspected my illness was returning, I made some arrangements. While Robert was focused on stock ownership and board seats, I was focused on what truly makes Palmer Tech valuable, our intellectual property. All of our key patents, including your cardiovascular stent, the diabetic monitor, and the nerve stimulation device, were quietly transferred to a separate holding company 3 months ago, a company called RDP Innovations, of which you are the sole owner. Palmer Tech has a licensing agreement with RDP for these patents, but it expires in 6 months and must be renegotiated with you directly. This was always your legacy, Rachel. Not a corner office or a fancy title, but the brilliant innovations that have helped so many people. What you choose to do with this information is entirely up to you. I trust you to make the right decision, whatever that may be. All my love, Dad. P.S. Mr. Chen has all the necessary documentation. The name RDP stands for Rachel Diana Palmer. Never forget whose daughter you are. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, before I finally called Howard. Is it true? I asked when he answered. About the patents. Every word, Howard confirmed. Your father was very thorough. Robert and the kids have no idea. The licensing agreement is buried in a stack of routine contracts Robert signed without reading. Why didn't Dad tell me? He was going to, Rachel. But then his condition worsened so quickly. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I hung up and sat in silence, staring at the letter. My father had given me leverage I never expected, the power to either save Palmer Tech or bring it to its knees. The question was, what would I do with it? For the next few weeks, I did nothing. I needed time to think, to grieve, to plan. I ignored calls from former colleagues curious about my sudden departure. I declined lunch invitations from industry contacts offering sympathy and job opportunities. I kept my own counsel just as my father would have done. What I did do was study. I reviewed every patent in RDP's portfolio, refreshed myself on their applications and potential, and researched the competitive landscape. I met discreetly with investors and industry experts, and slowly a plan began to take shape. 6 weeks after my unceremonious exit from Palmer Tech, I accepted a dinner invitation from Victor Nakamura, CEO of Meridian Medical, one of our biggest competitors. I was sorry to hear about your father, Victor said as we were seated at an upscale restaurant far from the Palmer Tech offices. James was a formidable competitor, but always a gentleman, and I was shocked to hear about your departure. Thank you, I said simply. It's been a difficult time. Victor nodded sympathetically. I imagine so, which is why I appreciate you meeting with me. I've long admired your work, particularly the cardiovascular stent. Brilliant design. That's actually what I wanted to discuss, I replied, leaning forward slightly. What would you say if I told you I control the patents to that stent and most of Palmer Tech's other key products? Victor's eyebrows rose. I'd say that's a very interesting development and potentially a very valuable one. I smiled. I thought you might see it that way. The following week, I met with Howard at a quiet coffee shop. He looked worried. Rachel, there's trouble at Palmer Tech. The key 3 numbers are in, and they're not good. The new product development head is struggling, and there are rumors that Meridian Medical is about to announce something big, something that could directly compete with the stent. Is that so? I kept my face neutral, stirring my coffee. Howard studied me closely. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? I might. Rachel, Howard sighed. Whatever you're planning. I'm planning to protect my father's legacy, I interrupted, and my own work. Did you know they've already started dismantling my team? Susan and Rajiv were let go last week. Howard winced. I heard. Things are chaotic. Michael and Stephanie are in over their heads, and Robert is too busy gloating to provide actual leadership. Then perhaps they need a wake-up call. Just be careful, Howard advised. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but this isn't about revenge, I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about respect and consequences. 2 weeks later, Meridian Medical announced a strategic partnership with a new company called RDP Innovations, focused on next-generation cardiovascular devices. The press release prominently featured my name and credentials, along with hints about revolutionary technology coming soon. The reaction at Palmer Tech was immediate and panicked. Their stock dropped 15% in a single day, Financial analysts began asking pointed questions about their product pipeline and intellectual property position. And suddenly, my phone was ringing nonstop with calls from numbers I recognized, including Michael's and Stephanie's. I let them go to voicemail for 3 days before finally answering. Rachel, Michael's voice was strained, missing its usual confidence. We need to talk. It's urgent. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can we meet? The usual conference room, tomorrow at 10. I pretended to check my calendar, making him wait. I suppose I could make that work. The next morning, I'd arrived at Palmer Tech for the first time since my departure. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, and whispers followed me as I walked through the halls. News of the Meridian deal had clearly spread. In the conference room, Michael, Stephanie, and Uncle Robert waited, their expressions a mix of anger, worry, and most satisfyingly, fear. "Thank you for coming," Michael began stiffly. I took my time sitting down, smoothing my skirt, placing my phone precisely on the table. "What can I do for Palmer Tech today?" "Cut the crap, Rachel," Uncle Robert snapped. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Selling our technology to Meridian? That's corporate espionage." "Actually, it's perfectly legal," I corrected him calmly. "I'm selling my technology, or rather licensing it, just as RDP Innovations had been licensing it to Palmer Tech, until that agreement expires next month." The blood drained from Robert's face. "What are you talking about?" I smiled and pulled a folder from my bag, sliding 3 documents across the table. "These patents, among others. Check the assignee." They huddled over the papers, faces growing increasingly pale as they read. "This can't be right," Stephanie whispered. "Dad transferred the patents." Michael looked up, stunned. "Why would he do that?" "Perhaps because he foresaw exactly this situation," I replied. "Or perhaps because he believed the inventor of these devices should control their destiny." "You can't do this," Robert insisted, his voice rising. "I'll sue you." You'll what?" I cut in. The transfers were legal, documented, and signed by both James and Robert Palmer. The licensing agreement has a clear end date, after which RDP is free to license these patents to any company it chooses. Mr. Chen can confirm all of this, though I'm sure you've already asked him. From their expressions they had. Michael leaned forward, switching to a more conciliatory tone. "Rachel, be reasonable. These patents belong with Palmer Tech. This is your family's company." "Is it?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "That's not what you said when you were escorting me out the door." "What was it again?" "You don't belong here anymore." Stephanie winced. "We made a mistake, Rachel. We were emotional after Uncle James died, and we made a bad decision. We want to fix it. By offering me my old job back, I guessed." "How generous." "More than that," Michael said quickly. "Head of R&D, a seat on the board, equity." I held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not interested." "What do you want then?" Robert demanded. "Money. Name your price." "It's not about money, Uncle Robert. It's about respect. Something I didn't get from any of you." "So this is revenge," he spat. "No," I replied evenly. "This is business. You decided Palmer Tech could succeed without me. I'm simply allowing you to test that theory." I stood gathering my things. My agreement with Meridian is being finalized next week. If Palmer Tech wants to discuss a licensing arrangement after that, you can contact my lawyer. "Wait," Michael called desperately as I reached the door. "At least give us a chance to match whatever Meridian is offering. We're still family, Rachel." I paused, hand on the doorknob, thinking about that word, family. About my father, who had built this company with his innovations and integrity. About the cousins I'd once loved, who hadn't hesitated to discard me when it suited them. "You know what the saddest part is?" I said, not turning around. "I would have shared everything, the patents, the technology, the future discoveries. All you had to do was treat me as an equal, as someone who earned her place here. But you couldn't see past your own ambition and entitlement." I looked back at them one last time. Dad always said that Palmer Tech's greatest asset wasn't its products or its profits, it was its people. It's a shame you never learned that lesson. As I walked out of Palmer Tech for what might be the last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. I hadn't wanted things to end this way, but perhaps, as Dad suggested in his letter, it was for the best. Howard was waiting by my car in the parking lot. "How did it go?" he asked. About as expected. Denial, anger, bargaining. They haven't reached acceptance yet. He nodded thoughtfully. And have you accepted that this might be the end of Palmer Tech as we know it? The question gave me pause. Was I ready to be responsible for the potential downfall of my father's legacy, for the livelihoods of hundreds of employees who had nothing to do with my cousin's actions? I don't want to destroy the company, I admitted. I just wanted them to understand what they threw away. And do they? I thought about the fear in their eyes, the desperation in their voices. I think they're beginning to. Howard smiled slightly. So what happens next? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before me. I'm going to sign with Meridian, but not exclusively. Meaning? Meaning Palmer Tech can still license the existing patents at fair market value with reasonable terms. They can even partner on new developments if they're willing to give proper credit and compensation to the actual inventors. That sounds remarkably generous, Howard observed. It's not generosity. It's good business. And it's what Dad would have done. I paused. But there's one non-negotiable condition. Which is a restructuring of senior leadership. Michael and Stephanie can stay, but in positions that actually match their qualifications. And Uncle Robert needs to retire. It's time for new blood at Palmer Tech. Howard chuckled. They're not going to like that. Probably not, but they're in no position to refuse. And who knows? They might actually learn something. 1 month later, I sat in a different conference room, this one at Meridian Medical's headquarters. Across from me were not only Victor Nakamura, but also Michael, Stephanie, and 3 members of Palmer Tech's board of directors. Uncle Robert was notably absent, having announced his retirement the previous week. Thank you all for coming, I began, surveying the faces around the table. I believe we have an opportunity here that can benefit everyone. Victor nodded. Meridian is prepared to move forward with our exclusive licensing arrangement, Dr. Palmer. Unless something has changed. Something has changed, I confirmed. I'm proposing a 3-way partnership instead. Meridian, Palmer Tech, and RDP Innovations, working together on next-generation medical devices. Michael leaned forward, unable to hide his surprise. You're willing to work with Palmer Tech again? Under the right conditions, I clarified. The patents remain with RDP. Both companies license them on fair terms, and any new developments include proper attribution and compensation for the actual inventors, no matter which company they work for. Stephanie frowned. But the competition is exactly why this makes sense, I interrupted. Meridian has distribution channels Palmer Tech lacks. Palmer Tech has manufacturing capabilities Meridian needs. Together, with the right technology, you could dominate the market rather than fighting over scraps. The board members exchanged intrigued glances. This was the kind of bold thinking they hadn't seen since my father's heyday. And where do you fit into this arrangement, Dr. Palmer? One of them asked. I'll serve as an independent consultant to both companies, focusing on what I do best, innovation. No corporate politics, no family drama. Just creating devices that help people. Victor studied me thoughtfully. This isn't what we discussed, Rachel. No, it's not. I agreed. It's better. For everyone. The negotiations lasted for weeks, with lawyers and executives poring over every detail. But 6 months after I was unceremoniously pushed out of Palmer Tech, a new entity was born. Palmer Meridian Innovation Partners, with RDP Innovations as a key stakeholder. Michael and Stephanie remained at Palmer Tech, though in positions better suited to their actual skills. Without Uncle Robert's influence, they gradually began to show sides of themselves I hadn't seen in years. The cousins I remembered from childhood, before ambition and entitlement took root. As for me, I found a new freedom in my independent role. I established a research lab that attracted top talent from both companies and beyond. I had resources and support without the constraints of corporate hierarchy. And most importantly, I was recognized for my work, not as James Palmer's daughter, but as Dr. Rachel Palmer, innovator in my own right. On the 1-year anniversary of my father's death, I visited his grave with a bouquet of his favorite flowers and a small glass plaque, similar to the one he'd given me years before. This one read, "To James, who taught me that true legacy isn't what you own, but what you create." As I placed it beside his headstone, I imagined what he might say if he were here. Probably something pragmatic yet profound, followed by that warm laugh that made everyone feel like part of the family. You were right, Dad, I said softly to the quiet cemetery. It wasn't the end of my story with Palmer Tech, just the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The breeze rustled the nearby trees, carrying away my words. But somewhere, I like to think he heard them and approved. In forcing me out, my cousins had inadvertently set me free. They tried to take away what was mine, only to discover the true value had been hidden away by a father who knew his daughter better than anyone. Not in corner offices or executive titles, but in the ideas that could change the world. Ideas that, unlike family businesses, couldn't be taken away by anyone.